Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to do a quick writing technique video. I feel like it's been a little while since I've done like an actual writing class on here. So today I'm going to go over the circle effect. The circle effect, or I guess you want to call it the circle technique. What it is it's really just a tool in your toolbox as a writer. It's just something that you can help apply to your writing usually early on in the plotting process. You usually very early in the drafting process you want to use this. It's not something that you necessarily can apply later. You can, but it won't be as effective. The point of using this technique is more just to help the initial plotting of your story. And specifically, it helps with stories that are built around a common idea or a common theme. If you're writing, literary fiction, this will be very helpful. Or if you're writing just works that have a certain idea you're trying to express, this technique can be very, very helpful in your plotting. So let's get into it. So what is the circle effect? What it is it's when an author repeats a similar phrase at the beginning and end of their book, or repeats a similar theme or idea at the immediate end or the immediate beginning of your book. Sometimes these phrases and ideas can be sprinkled throughout the entire story. In fact, that's often what you'll find. It is a very commonly repeated word throughout the entire story, or a theme that gets sort of kicked around and moved around throughout the entire tale. The repeating phrase is often a lot easier to identify because you'll. I'm sure if you think right now of certain books, you're going to recall certain books that just kind of repeat the exact same phrase over and over again. So you will see that a bit more, but again, any kind of similar theme or idea also works. And again, it has to take place at the immediate end or at the very end of your book and right at the beginning of your book. That's kind of like the main requirement, but again, you'll often see it repeated throughout the entire process. So let's give an example of this. I'm going to use Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. If you haven't read the book, I'll do my best right now to kind of summarize it. Basically, the book is really an anti-war book. It's about a gentleman, this fictional character, Billy, who becomes unstuck in time. He gets abducted by aliens at kind of the midway point of his life, and he basically learns from the aliens the ability to see life in terms of moments, both past and the future. So he basically can see his entire life, both the moments that led up to his abduction and everything after. He sees his death. He sees everything. He can see basically his death. He can see his time when he was in the army. He can see his time during his marriage. He sees all the events of his life. And the story basically is written kind of out of order to represent how unstuck the character of Billy is in time. But what the book basically examines is the effect that Billy had when he was in war. He was at Dresden, much like Kurt Vonnegut in real life was, basically during the firebombing during World War II. So, at the end of the book, The Slaughterhouse-Five, it ends with the phrase "pooty wheat." Pooty wheat. It's a bird chirping, basically, is what it is. Now, to go into that in sort of the circle effect of it, the phrase "pooty wheat" or "pooty wheat," the chirping sound, basically the chirping sound, it stands in as a symbol for war. What happens is the bird calls out at the very end of the book, at the end of this massacre. And so right at the very end, there's this massacre and the bird chirps. And what it is basically is it's a sort of stand-in for war by saying no one has anything intelligent to say about war. As though to say, well, this massacre happened and the bird chirping is as valid as any other statement you can make about it, in essence. Now, this bird chirping informs the rest of the book. At the start of the book, throughout the entire thing, the main theme of the book is the idea of commentary on war and the ridiculousness and sort of the inevitability of war, but also the fact that it is atrocious and there's nothing intelligent to comment about. So throughout the entire book, you will see this over and over again. Even at one point, there's a line basically, and I don't remember off the top of my head what it was, but there's a line where the phrase Putiwi is actually brought in earlier as well. So the phrase is repeated in the story, but it ends with that phrase with the common theme of there's nothing intelligent to say about war. And then if you look at the beginning of the story, it's the same thing. It ties into the beginning, and throughout the entire story, it's the same theme. As well, another example of this book is the phrase "so it goes." It's a repeated phrase that is used throughout the entire book. And basically, it echoes the idea of the detachment and dehumanization, right? As if to say, life goes on. Whenever something tragic happens, the character of Billy shrugs and goes, "So it goes." As if to say, life happens, life goes on. There's a very dehumanizing, very detached element to it. That phrase, "so it goes," is repeated throughout the entire story. So right here we have two examples of that. You can see how the phrase is repeated throughout the story and how it begins and ends with that same phrase. As a side note, just because I'm a bit of a nerd, I also think the phrase "so it goes" in Slaughterhouse 5 actually carries a bit of a deeper meaning than what people tend to ascribe it to. I think there's almost a sort of like Zen idea with it. And the reason why is, and again, this is me getting super nerdy here, but in the book, the character of Billy, when he becomes unstuck in time, he becomes like the Tralflamadorians, the aliens that teach him the technique, right? And much like the aliens, he is aware of the events of his life, both the war, his marriage, and his eventual death. All the events of his life, he's aware. So much like the Tralflamadorians, he's mastered the ability to become detached in a very Zen sort of sense, because he's accepted the inevitable, both the inevitability of his past and both the inevitability of his future. Whether good or bad, whether the moments are good or bad, he's accepted that these moments are simply moments that he's experiencing without any sort of emotional attachment. They simply are experiences. Every single thing he goes through is simply experiences. So it goes. Life goes on. That's me being nerdy. That's my own assessment. That's sort of me perhaps projecting a little bit of my sort of Zen, I guess, the sort of Buddhism ideal I tend to live by. But I'm quite certain that just from reading it, I think that's also a deeper meaning behind the phrase. But again, forget all that. That's just me again, just being kind of nerdy. So I've given you that example. I hope that this makes sense now, at least the idea of the circle effect and how to apply it. Again, the idea, just thinking of it in terms of a circle will help you. Like the idea of, okay, what starts at the beginning, it has to, where something starts at the beginning, it has to end at the same place, with the same idea, with the same phrase or the same theme echoed. Now, let's get into how to apply it. So how does one actually use the circle effect? What you want to do is, if you're going to use this, you want to write the last line first. So the ending of your book should be written first, the very last line. I know there are some people that hate this. Stephen King, I think, often talks about how writing the last line is like having his dessert before before his supper and all that. However, if you're going to use the circle effect, you need to know how the book's going to end. You need to know the exact way the book's going to end. You need to know the exact words that the book is going to end on. So what you do is you write the last line first, and then you start at the beginning and you write towards that ending. You write towards the ending, mirroring the same word and the same idea at the start, and you write towards that ending. And then any kind of editing, you also edit with the last line in mind. So when you go through your revision stage, you're always using the last word, the last sentence, the last line as sort of your compass, as sort of like your the final place, your final destination, basically on your road trip, right? If you want to think of like a road trip, you're always using the final line as kind of like your destination. Pretty helpful, right? Like if you're someone who's writing, who's perpetually bogged down maybe by bad endings, maybe you have a hard time plotting, maybe you have a difficult time sort of writing with a theme, like you have this idea or concept for a novel, you want to write about this topic, you're not sure how you can do it. Well, using the circle effect can be very, very helpful, because you're basically writing down your main idea and your main theme at the end of the book, and then just going to write it at the beginning, and then the in between, the middle basically of the story, is all about just getting to that point again. It's coming home. It's like going on this great adventure and coming back home basically. It can be very helpful, and it can make the process very, very easy. Now, why would someone want to do it? Like I said before, if you're someone that is trying to write a very sort of theme-orientated book, if you're trying to write something where you're trying to, I guess I'll say, be kind of sophisticated, this is a very, very good idea, because when you're writing like this, what you're doing is you're drawing parallels. You're trying to basically match the beginning and the ending, and the readers are going to enjoy it, because the human brain likes comparison. The human brain is always going to be trying to draw connections. So if you're going to write if you're going to keep the same idea at the end as well as the beginning, your reader is going to draw that connection, and they're going to think you're a genius. I mean, not really, but it does make people seem more iconic. The writers that tend to do this do, I think, in general, come across to the public as iconic or as, maybe a bit more intelligent than maybe the average writer, just because it's very, very fun to put this sort of thing together. It's very fun to recognize the sort of circularity of your writing. It doesn't mean that, obviously, that you doing this is going to make you some grand writer. But if you are someone that's maybe trying to, I'll be honest, just be perceived as a sort of like, really iconic or really good or really, virtuosic writer, I guess, if that's a concept of being an author, it can be very, very helpful to do this type of technique. The other thing is, obviously, like I said before, it makes the process easier. Plotting becomes much easier because you have a destination to work towards. And the other reason is you might want to do this is if you just have bad endings. If you're someone that maybe discovery writes, for example, or pantses, whatever you want to call it, where you don't necessarily use outlines and you just basically write, as you go. Plot or pantsing basically with the circle effect might actually be a very helpful technique, because even if you write the very last line and then you write the beginning that parallels that, even if you're going to pants the middle of it, right, at some point your story is going to circle back to that ending that ending line that you wrote. At some point, no matter how far off course you get, at some point you're going to wind up back at your very last line and drawing that parallel. And it can be very, very helpful to sort of steer your ship basically back to that. Other thing too is, because you're repeating the same phrase, the same idea throughout the book, if you are someone that perhaps pantses or discovery writes, what you might find is, okay, you get to a part where you're sort of lost. Okay, let's repeat the same phrase. Let's repeat the same idea in this section. That way I can kind of keep my story on track. It's something that helps just kind of wrangle your story back in if you ever find yourself moving too far away from where you were at the beginning. If you feel like your story is about to jump the shark, or whatever phrase you want to use, it can be very, very helpful to have that last line, to have that sort of unifying theme to bring your story back in. And that's really it. I mean, like I said, I didn't really intend this to be that long of a video. It's not like an overly complicated idea. I would suggest, again, just keeping it in your toolbox. I personally have not used this technique yet myself. I have not written a story where I've had the same words, the same exact, like final line echoed at the beginning, or the same theme at the very end used at the very beginning. I have stories that are very circular and have parallelisms involved in them, but I have not actually used this technique myself. If you have any kind of questions, though, on the circle effect, anything maybe I didn't cover in this video, leave it in the comments and I can answer it for you.